That's on. And you are ready.
Welcome to Cover Your Assets. I'm attorney David Meyer. Welcome back for those that have been listening to the show, and welcome to new listeners. It's good to have you. My radio show focuses on investment fraud and its impact on Main Street individual investors. We talk about some of the most common types of investment fraud. We talk about steps that individual investors can take to reduce their chance of becoming victims of investment fraud. And we explain the legal process available to recover losses caused by the misconduct of a stockbroker, financial advisor, or brokerage firm. There are billions of dollars of savings and retirements lost every year as a result of investment fraud. And here at Cover Your Assets, we try to be the voice of the individual investor. Got a lot to cover today. We have some breaking news this week. Richard Cordray, the chief of the Consumer Protection Bureau, decided to step down to leave the agency and run for governor of the state of Ohio. For those that may have listened to my prior show, I had a whole part of a recent broadcast about the CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and what they've done for consumers since its inception 5 years ago. It was designed as a result of the near collapse of our financial market, as a result of the turn down in 2008, the Dodd-Frank bill, and Congress set up this new Consumer Protection Bureau called the CFPB, and Richard Cordray was named the head of it in 2013. He was slated to be the head of it for 8 years. So his term was going to end up in July, I think, of 2018. He's decided to step down a little bit early to run for governor of the state of Ohio. And under Cordray's leadership, the CFPB has returned $12 billion in relief to more than 29 million Americans who have become victims of predatory and fraudulent financial schemes. So it's remarkable what the Bureau has done for everyday average Americans, mainstream consumers and investors across the country. Over 29 Americans have recovered over $12 billion as a direct result from the actions taken by the CFPB over the last 5 years. Now, the agency isn't going away. Cordray's stepping down, but the administration will propose and appoint a new leader, so it'll be very interesting to see how the new administration, the new leader assigned and appointed by the administration, will run the agency. There's been a lot of friction between the agency, Cordray, and the Trump administration. I spoke on the recent broadcast about the rule the CFPB had been investigating and researching for several years regarding mandatory arbitration provisions. Most banks and financial institutions have basically a no lawsuit clause buried in their contracts that none of us ever read and really understand, that prevent consumers who have problems with banks and many financial institutions. These clauses prevent the individual from filing lawsuits, grouping together to file lawsuits in court. You're obligated to pursue these claims in arbitration. That arbitration is much different than the FINRA arbitration for aggrieved investors, but it is arbitration, and the CFPB had proposed a rule to ban those no lawsuit clauses in bank and financial institutions contracts. It was set to go into effect in a couple months, but Congress passed a law to overturn that rule, and I had spoke about this on a prior broadcast. The Wall Street lobbyists raised millions of dollars over the last 6 to 9 months or year to try to fight that rule, because they didn't want their clients, the banks and Wall Street, to have to fight and these consumers in actual court. They like to do it hidden in the privacy of arbitration. And so these Wall Street lobbyists, was a big win for the lobbyists. They won, and after a 50-50 vote in the Senate, Vice President Pence came in, and in the nighttime hours when many of us were asleep, he cast the tie-breaking vote. So the CFPB rule banning those clauses buried deep in our contracts has been overturned. So that being done, we then move on, and Mr. Cordray has announced his resignation from the agency. and he announced that he's going to run for governor. So stay tuned to see who will lead the Consumer Protection Bureau going forward, the CFPB going forward. It'll be very interesting to see who the administration appoints as its new leader. Some other things we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about, I thought it would be good, just to look at the kind of calls that we're receiving. The stock market's up. We talked about this on a recent show, record-breaking highs. But still, unfortunately, we're at our offices in Ohio and throughout the country. We're receiving tremendous amount of calls from aggrieved investors, individuals who are still suffering tremendous losses of their retirement savings and their investments at the hands of unscrupulous brokers. And not a lot of it gets national attention. So again, one of the goals here is to educate the listeners and for folks who have any kind of investments or any kind of savings in investment accounts at banks and brokerage firms, or you might have siblings or aunts and uncles or parents, then I think hearing some of the stories that we hear at the offices of Meyer Wilson every week will shine some light and maybe, hopefully, prevent someone that you may know and love from becoming victims of investment fraud. We're going to talk about variable annuity sales abuses. Variable annuities are investments. We're going to talk about those that are sold all too often, way oversold in my opinion. We're going to talk about a recent call I received this week from a retired couple who were physicians who were sold a horrible variable annuity contract. We're going to talk a little bit about that because I've gotten hundreds and hundreds of calls over the past 15, 20 years about some just horrendous variable annuity abuses. So we'll talk about a recent one that I received. We're also going to talk about a widow who lost her entire life savings in risky alternative investments that were sold to her by her financial planner soon after her husband died. That's a case we're working on now, and I thought that would be a good case to identify and illustrate some of the problems we're seeing these days. The final topic, if we have time, we're going to talk about forged requests for withdrawals in elderly clients' investment accounts. We have a case. I had a gentleman in my office this week, over 90 years old. He's a widower, and he had his family, his kids that moved in, and unfortunately his kid stole money out of his investment account by forging his name. And we're going to talk about what the brokerage firm did and what we believe they should have done to prevent this from happening. So again, welcome to the show. It's called Cover Your Assets. I'm attorney David Meyer. I'm with the law firm of Meyer Wilson. The investment fraud lawyers at Meyer Wilson are a group of lawyers who spend all day, every day, chasing down financial advisors across the country who lie, cheat, and steal from their clients. We have offices in Ohio, in Michigan, in Southern California, and we represent individuals all across the country who have suffered losses as a result of the misconduct of their stockbroker or brokerage firm. Most financial advisors are honest. I say that often. We go after the ones who are not. We have a saying at our law firm that there's only one thing to do with a crooked stockbroker, and that's straighten them out. And that's what we do at Meyer Wilson. We cover your assets. If you can't catch the entire show now, we do put the radio show up on our law firm's website on Monday mornings. Our law firm's website is investorclaims.com. That's investorclaims with an S, investorclaims.com. Again, we have offices all throughout the country, Ohio, Michigan, and California, and we represent individual investors nationwide. So let's talk again a little bit about some recent cases that we're handling right now. These cases are indicative of the types of calls we receive weekly, unfortunately, from aggrieved investors, victims of investment fraud, every week at our office from all across the country. Let's talk about variable annuity sales. Variable annuities are the best way to explain a variable annuity is a mutual fund with an insurance wrapper. They're very, very complex products. Variable annuities are sold, in my opinion, way too often. They're a tax-deferred product, but unfortunately, even the product itself is tax-deferred. Unfortunately, I see these products being sold to individuals in their retirement accounts. So just first off, why would you need a tax-deferred investment vehicle to be purchased in an already tax-deferred account? it's like wearing a raincoat in the shower. It doesn't make any sense. But they are tax deferred, and they are sold in many different forms from many different insurance companies, sold by brokers and some insurance agents depending on their licenses. And the reason why they're so aggressively sold, in my opinion, is because the commissions are unbelievably huge. The clients that called me, the potential clients that called me out west this week, they're retired physicians, and they had collective savings of about $1.5 million. And this broker recommended and sold these folks a variable annuity of over $1 million. So just off the bat, this broker probably made a commission of $80,000 on day one just by selling this variable annuity. And these variable annuity contracts are complicated. They're very, very complex. I have cross-examined many brokers and managers of branches in FINRA arbitration cases where the broker had never even read the annuity contract. If you look at an annuity contract, and I advise, first of all, across the board, I would never buy a variable annuity, and I hope nobody I ever cares about ever buys a variable annuity. In my experience, variable annuities may be appropriate 1% of the time. Well, if you're playing the odds, out of 100 opportunities, that means they're being missold, in my opinion, 99% of the time. So the chance that you're the 1% and that you're able to determine that you are actually in that 1%, and I don't mean in terms of 1% of income or net worth, I'm talking about just in terms of the opportunities that are presented by these contracts. If they're presented and sold 100 times, they're probably, in my experience, inappropriate 99 of those 100 times. So my advice is stay away from it. If you want investments, you should buy some mutual funds or ETFs, and if you need insurance, there's plenty of other opportunities. For most folks, term insurance is the best way to go. But if you are to consider a variable annuity, ask to see the contract. You're going to be given, if the broker even has a copy of the contract. Oftentimes, I see cases where folks were jammed down their throats these variable annuities, and they didn't receive the contract until after they've invested the money. Now, sometimes there's a free, and I bet you that the broker won't understand it and probably hasn't even read it. In my experience, doing this every day for nearly 20 years, here's how these work. These variable annuities are being sold by salespeople, wholesalers, and they go around the country and they are selling these products to brokers and to branch managers. And they usually go to some fancy dinner, in my experience, and they get a big steak, some wine, and they give a PowerPoint. They give a fancy 3, 4, 5 page PowerPoint with nice pictures and big words, but very little detail. But they're talking about, the guaranteed income for life, and the options for annuitizing, and how great the products are. And that's what these representatives, the sales reps, the brokers, are using to, quote, learn, end quote, about the product. They're never diving into the actual language of the contract. So based on a several page fancy sales presentation, they go run around and sell these products, and the commissions, the commissions for a variable annuity as opposed to a mutual fund are multiples. $80,000 paid in one commission on $1 million annuity. It might be more than that. It depends on the commission structure. But they're just too hard for many people to turn away. Now, if you work with a fee-only financial planner, and if it's not fee-based but fee-only, then, and you're going to see, because those fee-only planners don't get paid commissions, those folks aren't selling those annuities. I think that's pretty telling that you don't see, I don't think I've ever seen, and that's a bold statement saying ever, but I can't recall sitting here if I've ever seen a fee-only broker sell variable annuities because the commission incentive is gone, and otherwise these products are very, very difficult to understand, very complicated, very expensive, and they're illiquid, and there's so many negatives to these things that my advice is to stay away. We're going to take a short break, and then we're going to get right back into the other items, other topics that I mentioned at the top of the show. So I'm David Meyer, listening to Cover Your Assets. We'll be right back. Good timing.
Yeah, no, I was actually producing another show, and I was like, I better go check. So looking good, everything's good still. Yeah, so you're right on time, actually. Perfect.
All righty.
Yeah, you want to go for it again?
Sure.
All right, you are ready.
Welcome back to Cover Your Assets. I'm attorney David Meyer. Thanks for joining me. We are talking about variable annuity sales abuses. So to finish that up, the folks called me, and they didn't understand that they had bought a product that they couldn't access their money. When you buy a variable annuity, your money's tied up for a long time. And if you take out more than, say, maybe 10% a year, you're going to pay a surrender fee. And these surrender fees can be as high as 10 or 15%. So if they wanted to cancel that variable annuity, as an example, it would have cost a penalty of $150,000. So in my experience, and in this particular case, the investments were poor. The investment choices were poor. They were expensive. And we did the math, and these folks needed to see a gain of over 4% a year, but just to break even. And forget the illiquidity and failure to be able to access the money, but just the costs embedded in these products are so high that there has to be such high performance just to break even. So it was really just when I heard this story and I told these folks that I just hear this so often about these variable annuities, and my advice again is stay away. So the next case is a case we are working on, in fact, just today before I came here to record the show. There's a widow in Missouri who had lost her entire life savings in risky investments sold to her by her financial planner. And this was a woman, she, back in 2008, she lost her husband. Her income in that year was minimal, like $15,000 or $20,000 of annual income. She lost her husband, and she received insurance proceeds from the death of her husband of about $500,000. And she had no prior experience with investing. Her husband had handled all of the family's financial affairs, which is pretty common that one spouse usually handles, in my experience, the financial affairs for the family. So she didn't know where to go, so she was referred to an advisor. She had $500,000. Now, obviously, what she should have done, and what she should have been sold, is a diversified portfolio of stocks and bonds, and mutual funds that provided some income, some protection, a reasonable amount of modest growth. It would have been pretty straightforward on how to put together a suitable, appropriate portfolio for a woman who's retired on a fixed income with no prior investment experience, with $500,000 and no ability to go earn any additional income. Despite that, that obvious solution that most sensible advisors would be recommending and implementing for this woman, this broker, and he was with a major brokerage firm, recommended she invest all of it, all $500,000, into highly risky, illiquid real estate investments called non-conventional investments, NCIs, in the industry. And so literally, this broker split this $500,000 into 8 separate risky, illiquid real estate investments, promising high returns, no risk, didn't identify at all. And there was even a written presentation to the customer, my client now, that failed to identify the material risk, failed to identify the lack of liquidity, failed to identify the commissions, and he told her that these were safe, income-producing investments and that she would be well taken care of. What he didn't tell her was that he earned $90,000 of commissions as a result of selling these investments to my client. $90,000, selling $500,000 of investments. And the fees, which of course she didn't know until she contacted us and we went through it with our expert, the fees just on an annual basis, in order just to break even on these investments, she had to earn between 12 and 15% a year. So as you might expect, these investments did horribly. They lost a significant amount of their value, and now here she is about 8 or 9 years later, and she's lost the majority of her life savings. And the market's been going up for so long, everyone thinks everybody's fine. So some people just let their guard down, and this is a perfect example of somebody selling to an unsophisticated retiree just a basket of complete garbage. I mean, there's not even an argument that this is appropriate for this investment. I would say there's not a retail individual investor out there anywhere where this type of investment would be appropriate for them if it made up a substantial part of their portfolio. Maybe 5%, maybe 3%, maybe 8% of someone's portfolio can be alternative investments, non-conventional investments. But to put 100% of a retiree's portfolio that she received from the death of her spouse into all these products is just absolutely horrible. So it's an honor to represent her. The case is proceeding, but that was a case I was working on today when I walked out of the office, so I thought that would be a good example to share. And this is not an anomaly. These types of stories, ladies and gentlemen, are what we hear every week at the law firm of Meyer Wilson. I always say that when I get to work Monday morning, I just can't believe that I'll hear a story as bad as what I'd heard, in prior weeks and months and years. But then, unfortunately, I always get a call at the beginning of the week of just devastation. Folks that work their entire life to save for their retirement. They do everything they're supposed to do. They're frugal with their money. They save for their retirement. They try to help their kids through school. They work the same job for many, many years oftentimes, and then they finally get their 401k rollover, their retirement, and they go to a unscrupulous broker, financial advisor, and then poof, in a short amount of time, they've suffered devastating losses. And there is a process to go about recovering those losses. You can learn more about that process on our website, investorclaims.com. We have articles, we have videos, we have checklists of all kinds of information to help you understand what the process is involved. And of course, you can always call our office toll free. The number's on our website, investorclaims.com, and learn about the process that is necessary to go about recovering losses caused by the misconduct of brokers and financial advisors. We've got a few minutes left. I want to talk about another case we're working on this week, where I had an elderly gentleman in his 90s, a Korean War vet, and he, a few years ago, his kids weren't doing well, and his daughter and her family weren't doing well financially, and so he invited them to come live with them. He and his wife at the time, in their late 80s at this point, and their daughter comes with their family. Soon after that, the gentleman's wife of 58 years dies, so he's a widower. He's there. He's elderly. He's declining in health, mentally and physically, and then the daughter gets a hold, sees some statements where he's got his retirement money, and goes online and obtains a withdrawal form. And this woman and her husband at the time fill out a request for withdrawal, and they forge, not even a very good forgery in my opinion, they try to forge his name, and they submit the form and are able to get the brokerage firm to sell securities in this client's accounts based on a forgery, liquidate the securities necessary to pay this withdrawal request, and then send the money to his bank account, and they stole it from his bank account. And they didn't do this once. I think there were 7 or 8 withdrawals. And if you look back, this gentleman had not taken out, for the most part, more than his same monthly withdrawal every month. And all of a sudden, over a course of a short amount of time, these folks have stolen a good portion and basically wiped him out. And in my opinion, this brokerage firm did not comply with any of the procedures. There's all types of rules and procedures that are supposed to be in place at brokerage firms to protect the elderly clients. It's not unusual to have somebody try to take advantage of somebody by trying to steal their identity or forge their signature. This is not uncommon. So there are procedures that are supposed to be in place, reasonable procedures that are supposed to be in place by these firms to prevent it. So now this gentleman is broke, and the law enforcement got involved and charged the daughter's husband with crimes, and I think he skipped town. So now we have this nice gentleman who's in his 90s and he's broke because this brokerage firm, in my opinion, did not adhere to the standards in the industry to protect their clients, particularly their elder clients. So if you have elderly family, make sure that there are protections in place to minimize the chance of this happening. I mean, sometimes it's a bad broker, sometimes it's a bad family member, sometimes it's a stranger. There's all types of problems that can occur. So you really need to sit down with elderly family members. If there's a power of attorney for somebody that has the financial wherewithal and the time and the energy to be able to protect their family member, maybe have another person on the statements, have statements delivered to an adult child is another good example to minimize, because in this case, had the statements been sent somewhere else, then this might have been caught prior to the time it was stolen. So again, just a devastating, heartbreaking story, but unfortunately pretty typical from what we're seeing at the law firm of Meyer Wilson. We hope to be able to help that individual. So those are a couple stories of just one of several of many in our firm that we're seeing different examples of fraud that can occur at the hands of sometime a negligent broker or a brokerage firm. So that's a wrap for today. Thank you for listening. Again, if you weren't able to catch the entire show, you can listen. You can go to our website, investorclaims.com, on Monday morning, and we'll have a recorded version of this on our website, and we also have the prior versions of our broadcast on our website. So again, thank you for listening. This is David Meyer, and you've been listening to Cover Your Assets. Thank you.
So you've been getting that show okay without the spots, right?